Welcome back to Building Websites with Python and Django. I'm Christopher Harrison.
Your coffee's right there.
That's Susan Ivack. My coffee is right here. In any event, in the last module, Susan, you showed us some really neat tools for being able to create classes that's going to be our data, and then use that to create the database. But how about the actual, data? How do we actually work with the data without having to write the SQL manually?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's definitely the next step. So all we've done so far is we've defined some models. Remember, models are just classes we created in our Python code. And then we used via ORM, or via Object Relational Mapper, to migrate that model to the database itself. So basically what we now have is classes inside our code and tables in our database. But there's no data in these tables. And one of the things we promise is that Django would also help you with writing your queries, doing your insert and update statements. So that's what we're going to try and demystify now, is how do you actually start working with the models in terms of code, inserting new records, updating new records, and so on. So what I'm going to cover in this particular module is I'm going to show you how to create new records, how to update records. Then we'll get into some queries. We'll look at some very simple queries of like how do you get back a record where ID equals. And then we'll get into more customized queries. And we are only going to scratch the surface here. When you get into custom queries, I used to teach SQL courses as well. And there was a 3-day course on writing SQL statements to do things like queries and so on. We could probably do a full 1-day course on writing Python queries through the ORM in Django, showing you all the different options and features. So we'll get you going with it so that you can write some basic queries and hopefully get used to the syntax so that when you want to do something more advanced, you can very quickly find that syntax and see how it applies. So we're going to get you up and running, get you to maybe like the 200 level, but you can go to the 300, 400 level. So we're just going to scratch the surface because I know you guys want to see things like the bootstrap, how to create the forms, how to migrate, deploy this whole thing. So we want to make sure we get a chance to show you that as well. So let's start with creating data. I want to, yes, Christopher, you pointed out, I got no data in my tables. I want to start adding some new artists, adding some new albums into there. So let's do that. Now, the great thing is, if you have ever done object-oriented coding, if you know how to create an instance of a class, you know how to create a record. Because basically, remember, our class is our table. So when you create a new instance of the class, that's creating a new record in the database table. And the ORM is going to take care of taking that instance of a class and sending it to a database. Now, it's not just going to do that randomly and go, oh, you created an instance, I'll just move that to the database for you. You control when it sends that new record to the database by calling a method. So when you call the save method, that's your way of saying, hey, I've got a new instance here, please send that new record to the database. Or if you modify a record, you say, I've made a change, I want to send that change to the database. Calling the save method is your way of saying, now's when I want to actually send that new record to the database. So how does that look in terms of code? Well, if we take a look here, what we end up with is I have my artist class that I'd created. So I just say, all right, let's create a new instance of the artist class. And I just call the constructor method. So I say, all right, the value for the name is going to be artist name, whatever I type in, and the value for year formed is going to be whatever year was formed. And then when I want to send that record to the database, so it actually inserts it into the table, I just call the save method. Now, some of you may be looking at that going, Susan, you never wrote a save method. And it's true. If we actually look at the code, there's nothing in here. There's no save method.
Susan, you never wrote a save method.
I never wrote. You're right. I'm glad you brought that up, Christopher. But remember, when I created the artist class, I inherited from the model class. So that model class in the models package has the save method. So that's where that save method comes from. So I don't have to declare it here. I inherited that from the model class. So now to test this, to sort of show you how it works, the easiest thing to do is actually, you would be writing this code inside your web pages and the sort of the logic of your code. But I'm actually just going to open up a command window where I can just run some Python commands so we can do it interactively so that we don't get lost in the navigating the structure of all the pages right now. We can focus in on literally how do we write that code that's going to interact the database, insert our record, query our records. So the way we do that is in Visual Studio. If you want to try this yourself, you go to your project and you right-click the project and you pick Python Open Django Shell. And this basically gives you a shell where you can execute Python Django commands. So it's popping up here. And let's bring that up here so it's going to be a little easier to work with. There we go. So here's my shell. So I can go ahead and say, I want to create a new artist. And it's going to be an instance of the artist object. It is case sensitive, so I've got to be a little careful there. And it's an artist object. And I'm going to go with my favorite band. I'm a big fan of Great Big Sea. And Christopher's laughing because he knows I'm inclined to burst into song at any moment with songs by that band. And they say they were formed in, say, 1985, somewhere around there. So I run this command, and basically, whoops. Oh, you know what I forgot to do?
Got to import an artist.
Right. This is a blank shell. It doesn't know what the artist model is. So I just have to go to my application, whoops, import from the app dot, it always does that the first time, from app dot models, because remember, this is in the models .py file of my app, so it's in app dot models. I want to import artist, and that's why it's going, hey, I've never heard of artist. So once I've imported that, then I can go ahead and create my new artist. Okay, so I've successfully created an artist, but right now that's just an instance of the object in my code. I need a way of saying, take that instance of the object. That is meant to represent a record of a database. Go do an insert statement of a database based on that. So what I do now is I call newArtist.save. And that's that method I inherited from the model class. And it has now gone off and inserted that record in the database. And we'll see that in a little bit when we learn queries, because we'll actually do queries to get that record back. So that's it. I mean, look at all the incredibly long, complex code I wrote over here again. So over here on the left-hand side, you can see here's this incredibly complex code I used to define the data and the model and all the columns in the database that I migrated. And here's the incredibly complex code I wrote to create a record and insert it to the database. So it said this is one of the reasons Django is so popular, is because if you're used to working with objects, this is very intuitive. You don't have to go off and learn all the SQL.
Yep.
ORM does it for you. OK, let's pop back over to here for a second. If you want to do an update statement, so we need to update an existing record, what you can do is once you have an instance of the object that represents that record, change its property, because each property maps to a column in the database. So if you change one of the properties, in this case, if we take a look here, you can sort of see we've got the name property of our artist, and we change it to some new value. And when you want to send that updated value to the database, send an update statement to the database, once again, you're just going to call the save method. So if we try that and put that into practice, we just go over here and we go new artist dot year formed, and we say, let's say that for that particular, because I have this instance new artist already, so I could just modify that record and say year formed is 1986 instead of 1985. And then I just say save, and the ORM is going to detect what's been modified on the new artist instant and send an update to the database with that change. Done. I've just done an insert and an update.
And we don't have to worry at all about the database itself. It's just taking care of everything for us.
Yeah, the save statement is basically telling the ORM, hey, take any changes, any new records, any updates to that record, send them off to a database.
I like it.
Yeah, great for lazy coders.
Yeah.
Happy Susan. All right, so I've just done that demo. Now, of course, I know there's a lot of people going out there, you say it's saved, Susan.
Yes.
But I'm not sure I trust you. You know, they've probably seen me do demos before and know they don't always go perfectly. So, all right, fair enough. And this is where I'm crossing my fingers, really hoping it did work, so that the next command demo works. Because if the first demo didn't work, I'm going to find out right now. So this is my moment of truth. I'm now going to run a query to go to the database and say, hey, give me back that artist that I just inserted. So how do I do queries?
How do you do queries?
Well, we use the save method to send update and insert statements to the database. The way we do queries is that model that we inherited in our code. So again, coming back to the code itself here, just moving this out of the way. So once again, right, all the magic happens because we inherited this model class. We inherited the save method from that. We also inherited an extra property called objects. And the objects property is a collection of the records that are in the database, effectively. So when we want to do a query, we always work with the objects property. And it has its own methods that allow us to do queries. So we're going to go to artist.objects.filter, artist.objects.get, artist.objects.get, artist.objects.filter. That's always going to be sort of our logic when we want to say, go get this record from the objects for artist. Go find these records from the objects of artist. So it's all about that objects property, which was added automatically because we inherited from the model class. So in terms of the code, how does it actually look? It's going to look something kind of like this. So if you take a look here, what you see is here's that artist.objects. That's the magic here. Instead, that was added automatically because we inherited from model. And this time, I'm calling the all method, which, okay, Christopher, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second.
Uh-oh.
Take a wild guess at what the all method will do.
I'm going to say it's going to get you everything. It's going to get you all the items.
There we
Download
go.
all the things.
Download all the things, exactly. So when we call the all method, basically it's going to go off and tell us all of the records stored in the database for the artist object. And then we put that into some sort of collection object like all artists. And then if you want to see the results of that, you could write a little for loop that says just go through each artist inside all artists and then print out whatever property you're interested for, in this case, maybe the name. If you only want to get a single record back, well, you can do that as well because, again, we always start with that artist.objects, right? That's our property that allows us to access the records. And we call the get method, and we ask it for 1. Now, one of the things, what that is sort of doing is that's kind of, if you've done SQL, it's kind of like saying select where ID equals 1. That's kind of what we're doing when we do a get statement.
Yep.
So because we specified a value of 1, by default, that 1 is going to be the ID. If you just specify. I'm going to show you how to do it like where name equals in a second, but that's the default. So basically that's equivalent to sort of saying select where ID equals 1, and once you've got that record back, you can display it. So let's try that out. Because again, I think this is one that it makes more sense when you see it in action. So we've inserted a record to the database, so we should be able to say get me back all records. So the way we do that is I say I'm going to declare a variable called all artists to hold the results of the query back. And I have to go to the artist.objects method. And I love IntelliSense. Saves me making some typos. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to start by doing the get me all objects back. And that basically, that method has now just executed. The ORM has taken that command, gone to the database, said, hey, somebody asked for all the artist objects. It's gone to the database table, done a select star from this table, gotten all the records back, and populated my all artist variable with every single record from the database. In this case, only 1, but if you had 50 records, it would populate it with 50. So now, how do I prove that? Let's go back to our code. I'm going to write a little for loop here. And, well, actually, I could even do it this way. It's a collection, so I could just say, get me the first record. So go to the first record and tell me what the ID is. And if I run that, it says the ID is 1. And if I say from the first record, whoops, get me the name, it says great big C. So you can see it, in fact, did bring back that first record. Or if you want to see all the records, in this case, there is only 1. But again, you could still do the for artist in all artists. Don't forget your colon. I always have trouble with that in Python. I always forget my colon when I'm writing for loops. And I could say, and then for each artist that you find, print out that artist name. And it comes back again. In this case, I only actually have 1 record, so there's only 1 that returns. But if I went off and created a second artist and saved that, it would retrieve all of them. Now, what if I only want to retrieve 1 record back? And because, of course, if you really only want 1 record back, it's not very efficient to say, go bring me back 6,000 records and then retrieve the one you want once it's all been brought across the network to your code. If you know which record you want back, you know what its ID is, you can say, go get me the record with ID of 1. So let's try that out in the code and see how that turns out. So for that, I just say individual artist equals, and we always start with artist.objects. But instead of doing the .all, we say just get the record 1. And when you say get 1, it assumes you want to get the record where the ID equals the value you pass in here. So that's basically 1. And whoops. I'm actually going to do it this way. ID equals 1, even simpler. There we go. ID equals 1. And then we can ask for the artist.name of the record. And it comes back and says the record with an ID of 1 is great big C. So I can ask for a particular one individual record, or I can just get all the records back and loop through them and process them. So these are basically select statements, but I'm running against the database. The ORM is doing all the magic for me.
Yep.
I did not write a get method. I did not write a save method. I did not write a query method. I'm just using the built-in functionality of Django and ORM. So let's do some more magic. There's got to be more we can do with this, because that's, when I know as soon as you start getting to queries, you guys start going, well, what if I want this type of query? And oh, wait, I want it to be case insensitive. And I know the Q&A window is going to light up as we start getting into queries here, and we can't cover them all. But there's a lot of great documentation on it. But I will get into some slightly more advanced queries here. So we used the get method. Now, the thing about the get method is the get method is kind of like, if you've ever done select statements in code, there's often a command called select into. And the way it works is it's only allowed to get back one individual record. If it returns more than one record, you actually get an error message. So you'll actually raise exceptions. If it returns no records, you'll get an exception back. So anytime you use the get method to retrieve a record from a database, if you get back 0 records, it's going to throw an exception, something along the lines of no record found. I don't remember the exact exception it throws. If you retrieve more than one record, it returns an exception, something along the lines of multiple records found. So if you are executing a query and you don't know if it's going to return 0 records or 15 records, if you're saying where ID equals, if that's your primary key, you should only get 1 record back. But if you're saying get me all the albums by the artist Great Big C, you might get back 15 results. So in that case, we need a way of saying, get me multiple records. So we have that .all, which gets us everything. But what if I only want the records by Great Big C? I don't want a list of every single album in the albums table. I want only the records by Great Big C. So at that point, I'm doing sort of a where clause, or I'm trying to filter out the results, but I'm still going to get back multiple results. So I'm going to get back 10 records. That requires using the filter method. So if you go back to the slide for a second, you'll see here there's another method we can use called filter. And that's the one we used to bring back the multiple objects. So important to know when to use each. And if you're using get, make sure you do your try except. I'm channeling my inner Christopher here by scribbling all over the screen.
Yep.
So make sure you do a try except to handle the exceptions of no record found and multiple records if you do use the get.
You are going to notice we're not going to bother with try except, just to try and keep things a little bit simpler. I mean, best practice, yes, put it in. We're not going to worry too much about error handling.
No, not because, we're just trying to show you how it works.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's take a look at the syntax of how we use it. If you want to not search by ID, but maybe you want to find the record where name equals something, it's actually very similar to syntax to what we did when we were searching by ID. Once again, we start with artist.objects. That's a constant. That's the same anytime you do a query. We are expecting, maybe I'm saying, get me information about the artist named Great Big C. And I expect that to only return 1 record. So because I expect it to return only 1 record, I can use the get method. And then instead of saying ID equals, I just simply say, get me the record where the name equals whatever the artist's name is. And that will work just fine. So you could be name equals, where year formed equals, whatever column you want to specify. And if the other one, and now this is where it starts getting cool, you can also do things like you may have used in SQL world, you may have used something like, let's do this here. You may have tried something like select where like something great %. So maybe you've tried these sort of like statements, these idea of pattern matching in your where clauses. So you want to find things that start with the phrase great, but you don't know what it ends. Great gobs of fire, great big C, great expectations, and so on. So what we can do is there is the ability when you use the filter, and this of course could return multiple records. So I'm using filter this time instead of the get. So we again always start with artist objects. I'm using filter because it could return more than 1 record. But instead of just saying name equals, I say name starts with equals great. So that starts with is a clue. It's a parameter I can specify when I call the filter method to say any name that starts with this phrase is a match. So that's like saying get me the records where the name is like great %, and so on if you've played with SQL statements. So it allows me to do pattern matching in my search.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to point out something really, really important in the slide. Important in this slide.
Important.
That is, whoop, 2 underscores. Hang on, that's nice.
Yes,
Jumping back
2
here.
underscores.
That is 2 underscores. That's name underscore underscore starts with. It's not always clear when you're looking at a slide, but that is actually underscore underscore there if it has been typed in. And now the other thing that you run into is our search is case sensitive. That comes up a lot of times in databases. In Canada, we have our postal codes or zip codes. We call them postal codes in Canada. They have letters in them. And you run into a lot of problems where when people are on a web page, they might enter the postal code in lowercase. But when we're searching for it, sometimes we search for it and we don't know whether to search for uppercase or lowercase letters, so that causes problems. So sometimes we want to be able to do a search, and I don't care if you entered a lowercase k or an uppercase k, as long as it matches the letters, and I don't care if it's upper or lowercase. Any of these little tricks that you see, or these parameters you can specify, you have the option of specifying a letter I on the parameter, and it turns it into a case-insensitive search. So if you take a look at the slide here, you can actually see that I do the starts with. So again, first part's always the same, artist.objects. I'm using the filter because I could get back multiple records. And I'm doing the name starts with 2 underscores. But you'll also see that little letter I there. And that turns this into a case-insensitive search. So if I entered great big C with lowercase letters, this would return a match, whereas the previous one would not. There's other ways to do this too. What if you were doing an exact match? You're not doing this pattern matching. Well, you can do that as well. Another great example here. If you take a look at, again, always starts with same. Hopefully this is starting to look familiar. Starts with artist.object. And if you're doing a get, you're expecting to get back 1 individual record or only get me the record. You can do this with filter or with get. You've got the get. And you say name equals artist name, you're like, well, how do I make that into a case-insensitive search? You can do it because these 2 commands are actually exactly the same. The only difference is here I say name underscore underscore exact instead of name equals. The advantage to using this name underscore underscore exact syntax is the fact that I can add an I if I want to right here, and that turns it into a case-insensitive search, and is actually an example of that on the next slide. So you can see here that I can just add that I to turn this into a case-insensitive search as well. So lots of options here. So let's go try a couple of different queries here for some examples to sort of show you some more complex queries inside our code that we have here. So what we'll do is, first let's do a sort of get me the record. Instead of searching by ID, let's search for the record where name equals instead of where ID equals, because that comes up a lot in your code. You never know exactly which column you're going to be searching by. So I might say, searching it by name, the name of the artist is artist dot objects. That's always going to be the same. I'm only expecting 1 record back with the name great big C, so I can use the get and get me the record where name equals great big C. How do I know it worked? Well, I can just print out the result and just say, what's the value of name artist dot name? And sure enough, it comes back with that. Or if I wanted their ID value, or I wanted to know the year they were formed, any property I want, you can see that whole record came back. Oh, name.artist.yearformed. Name.artist, that would do it. The field is called name artist, year formed. Must be getting close to a mealtime. I'm starting to make more typos in my code. And as we all know, the number of typos you make is directly proportional to the number of people watching you type.
Exactly.
So the more of you watch...
Everybody close their browser window. No, I'm kidding. Stay. I'm kidding.
Yeah. All right. OK, so what if I want to retrieve multiple records back? Let's try that filter, which allows us to retrieve multiple records. So I might say get a list of query artists. And we always start with artist. I seem to have this obsession with an uppercase R. Must be because of my talk like a pirate day tendencies and going R. Artist objects, filter. And when we do the filter, we say, get me all the records where year formed equals 1986. And if there were 10 bands, from that year, this would still execute successfully. It won't throw any exceptions because the filter, remember, can handle return multiple records. To get the results back, you could write a nice little loop in query artists. And then each time through the loop, just say print the name of each artist. So that, again, in this case, I only have one record of a table, so we're only seeing one result back. But if there were 10 bands, this would list off all the bands who had the year formed in 1986. So that's kind of like saying select star from artists where year formed equals 1986, if you think in terms of SQL, if you've worked with SQL already. If you've never worked with SQL, you don't have to learn it because ORM's doing it for you.
Yep.
You just need to learn how to call these different properties or set these different parameters to control the data you want back. Another one I just want to mention, because it may come up, is you may be going, well, what if I want the records where year formed equals and country of origin equals? So how do I do like an AND statement or something like that to combine? The way you do that is, just to sort of show you the logic, is after the dot filter, you just add another dot filter statement. So I would add country equals Canada. So you can do that as well. You can even say, there's another way of, I won't execute this because I don't have a column with country equal to Canada. Another one you can do is kind of cool, is there's also the ability to say except as well. I think it's except. It's something like that. And
exclude.
Exclude, thank you. Because yes, except is usually an exception.
Yeah.
You can say exclude country equal Canada. So I want to know all the bands that were not from Canada that were formed in 86. So, and then you can add another filter afterwards. So this is how you combine all kinds of different conditions together. You just keep adding more dot exclude, dot filter, and that's how you have multiple conditions on a query if you want to. So just wanted to mention that because it's something that sometimes comes up. Trying to think of some other neat ones. Let's, oh, we got the foreign keys. I think we should show that.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. One more thing I want to show you. This is cool.
Because you haven't had an error yet.
Yeah, well, no, I have one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Typo. All right, there's one more thing that's really cool that I absolutely love about this as Susan the Lazy Coder. When I taught a lot of SQL statements and select statements, and we work with relational databases, the data is often spread across multiple tables. So the artist information is in the artist table. The album information is in the albums table. If I want a list of album names, all the albums by a particular artist, then what you would have to do is you would have to query both the tables and join that data back together using what we would call SQL join statements. And trying to explain to somebody who's never done SQL before how you write these join statements that combine the data from table A with the data from table B and bring that all back together, that took pretty much, I would say, you used to teach SQL, Christopher. I mean, that was a good solid hour, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Really. And even after the hour, people were kind of like, I think I get it.
Right.
So it's one of those concepts that frequently throws people off. ORM does it for you.
So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about joining.
You're not going to have to write join statements.
Cool.
So because remember how when we created the artist and the albums, we made that foreign key between artist and album. You remember we did that? Mm-hmm. So Django already knows that which artists go with which albums. So all we have to do is say, we call it like a parent. People think of it as like a parent-child relationship. You know, each artist has multiple albums. We might think of artist as the parent and albums as the child. You can literally say, go get all the children by just saying, follow that relationship. Just go get me those records. So this is really cool. So the way we do that inside Django is you basically can walk this relationship chain, walk your foreign keys by following that relationship we created. As long as you made a foreign key between the two objects, you can just go ahead. And again, you look at the syntax, and you wouldn't even know you're doing a foreign key search here. You still go ahead. You still call album.objects. You know you may get multiple records back, so we're doing filter rather than get. And then I just say, get me the record where artist name is, and you specify an artist name. But here's what's interesting about that, is artist name is not stored under albums. If we actually go and look at the class we created here, there is no artist name here. We have the album name, but we don't have the artist name. We said, however, there would be an artist, and that for artist, there is a name field. Mm-hmm. So basically, when you look at the syntax here, what you're really seeing here is this is saying the field artist, and then again, this is 2 underscores. On that artist, look at that artist's name property, and get me the record where the artist's name property is artist name. Again, very careful. That's got to be 2 underscores or it's not going to work. So let's try that out, because I think that's really one of the coolest things about Django is this comes up all the time in your code. You have all the orders for a customer, all the albums for an artist. You have all the items that somebody ordered that you have to track together. So this sort of idea of get me all the orders for a customer, that sort of parent-child foreign key comes up all the time. So the ability to just say, hey, just go get them, and all you do is in syntax say, I just need the artist name equals, and it finds it through the foreign key is great. So to do it, I'm going to have to import the albums here because we haven't actually added the album class to this little window we're working in here inside our shell. So we better import album so it knows how to use the album class. And right now I don't actually have any album records, so I'm going to insert a couple of new records to the album database. So I got to flash back now and remember how to do my inserts. To do that, I create a new instance of the album class. And I'm going to be a little shortcut on my code here. I could say new album equals album, and I can do this, and then I can call new album.save, but I'm going to do a little shortcut here. I'm just going to go straight to the constructor of the album class, and I'm going to say create a record where name equals up. That's one of the albums, and the artist is new artist, because we do have a variable, an instance already called new artist, which points to great big C, so that saves me having to set all that up already.
And the only reason new artist works is because you had created that
That's right,
earlier.
yeah, great. If we go way back up here, remember, we created an instance of an object called new artist with the name great big C. So I'm just taking advantage, because otherwise I would have to write a query to go get the record of the artist I wanted it to point to and then use that here. So I'm just taking advantage of the fact that I already have an instance of an object that points to great big C. And so I specify new artist, and then I can just say, as soon as you create that instance, save it to the database. And I made a mistake somewhere. Artist equals new artist.save. Name equals up.
Oh, yeah, you were supposed to get an error there.
Not yet. Shouldn't blow up until I'm just trying to insert.
Okay.
That shouldn't blow up just yet. Artist.save, album, name equals up. Artist equals new artist. And I think that's correct, and save. Just gonna make sure I have the casing all right on that. It is new artist. Yeah, that's correct. There we go. Here's my my blow up of the day. Couldn't get this far without something blowing up. I'm gonna take a quick look at the error message. App album has no column named artist ID. So
rerun a migration just in case.
Sure, we can do that. That's gonna require going over here. All right, so this is the live debugging with the Python Django MVA. Let's go here. Shouldn't make any difference, though. Python. Do you want to rerun the migration? Or?
Yeah, so manage, just say manage py.
Manage.py.
Just
redo the make migration first? Or we might as well, eh?
Just try migrate. Just try migrate.
Try just doing a migrate? All right, we'll try that. Migrate. Synchronizing, no migrations to apply. Your models have changes that are not reflected in a migration, so
okay.
applied.
Yeah, so you will need to remake a migration.
Yeah, I'm going to rewrite the migration just to make sure that the database reflects the structure I think I have. So yeah, let's do that. Python manage.py make migrations -- name please work app. Okay. I am trying to add a non-nullable field artist to an album without a default. You can't do that. The database needs something to populate existing rows. This is interesting.
Just provide a one-off value. So just hit 1?
Yes, set a default. So I should have, obviously I should have specified a default value when I defined that column.
Yep.
All right, so now let's do the migration.
Work? Actually,
let's
you
redo
need
the
to
make
provide a
migrations.
value. Yeah, so this is your sample value.
Oh, enter the default now as value of the date time, time zone now. It's a date time.
Huh.
Why do I have a date time field? I didn't think I had any date time fields. Excuse me. A little confused here. Positive integer field, char field, ID field.
Just give it a value. Just type in a number 1.
Okay. We'll try that. I'm just worried. There we go. All right. So it's adding the field artist to album. which it did need. You know, it's funny. Somebody brought up in the Q&A that they didn't notice the foreign key to artist on the SQL statement. So maybe you spotted that there. Good eye. I didn't. I wasn't looking for that. I was just looking at the create table statements. And now let's do our Python manage.py migrate to migrate those changes. Okay.
There we go.
All right. Now let's go here and see if it will successfully let me create that new album. Yay!
There we go. Okay.
Thank you, Christopher.
You're welcome.
You have earned your cookie for the day. Yeah, we care. Like,
we'll figure something out.
I don't know. It's all good. You have earned your cookie, sir.
All right. Yay.
All right. So now we can go add a second album. Not said. That's very odd that it didn't create it on the first time. And now we create a second album. Sea of No Cares, and the artist is that same artist. .save. Okay, and so now we've created 2 albums by that artist. So now we should be able to do one of those foreign key queries where we say, go get me all the albums where the artist name is Great Big C. And the most important thing to realize, right, is nowhere in the albums class is there an artist name field. It's this foreign key that's going to allow me to search by artist name, even though artist name is in artists and I'm querying albums. That's the kind of neat thing. That's where the magic of Django comes in. So I can go ahead and now I should be able to say, okay, list of albums equals, always starts the same, going to the objects property, doing a filter as opposed to a get, because I'm expecting multiple records back, and get me the record where in the artist double underscore the name property, so I'm pointing to the name property of the artist class. Well, I'm going to the artist of album, but I'm asking for the name property of the artist equals Great Big C. And now the good news is I was expecting this one. Big, nasty error messages all over the place. You know, sometimes those pop up and you're like, Susan, it bombed on you. But there's times when we're like, no, this one we do.
Yeah, this one we expected, although I like Danny's immediate instinct was, oh, it blew up, let's not show that on the screen.
I love that. That was great. Yes, I do have to thank Danny here in the studio for very kindly, the moment the error message went spewing all of my screen, going, I better save her by going back to video, because sometimes we don't expect these messages. But actually, we can bring this one back up. This big, nasty thing is basically just popping up. Sometimes there's certain setups especially when you're working in this shell, parts of a Django setup that aren't completely loaded that allow the foreign keys to work. So there's just an extra little command I have to run. I'm going to have to just import Django, and run Django.setup. And that's going to just set up the components that aren't in this Django shell that allow the foreign key to work. And once I've done that, now this time if I get big nasty error messages, Danny, that'll be your cue to show Christopher right away, smiling and waving, if there's error messages when I run it this time. But we're good. Okay, so we run it. Nice, goes to a prompt, so it's apparently executed successfully. How do I know it worked? Well, I check the results. So I can say, okay, for each album in the albums that I just got back, let's print the album name. And I should see listed all the albums. There's Up and Sea of No Cares, the 2 albums for that artist.
Beautiful.
So that's effectively a join statement in Django with 1 line of code.
That's it.
Happy land for lazy coders is what it comes down to. And I believe that sort of takes us through to the end of another module. We've done some pretty powerful queries.
Sort of does. I actually want to kind of go back and do a spin on the demo that you just did.
Oh, sure.
So here's what happened is Susan just walked you through how to actually create and then query back data by utilizing the Django ORM APIs, which is wonderful, and that was the exact goal. And then somebody in the chat window said, hey, how about, and you can actually cut to my screen here, I've got it up, how about using the DB browser for SQLite and showing us the database? And I went,
sure.
Hey, that's a great idea. Let's go ahead and do that. So I went ahead in the background here and I created that same exact very complex structure that you created. And I've now opened up the database. And so what you'll notice here is that I've got my app album and app artist. Those are the 2 tables in question here. And so you'll notice that if I go to app album and I hit refresh, that right now I have no data. So if I go to Visual Studio here, And let me do the exact same thing. A lot of people have been asking, how do we get to that Django shell? So again, it's right-click on the project, go to Python, and then open Django shell. There we go. And so now what I could do, and I'm just going to shortcut this, I'm just going to say artist, and I'm going to say name equals The Cure, showing our music tastes here. And we'll say year formed equals, and I think it was 1978. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and call
your age.
save. There's that too. And
oh, you haven't imported.
Oh, you're right.
You
Thank
forgot
you.
to import artist.
From app import
App.models, I think
artist.
you may have to specify.
Yeah, you're right. Models. There we go. Thank you. There we go. Yeah, I'm trying to kind of move a little quick here.
No, I understand.
Yeah, and so now you'll notice that I've saved that, and now if I come back over here to my database, sure enough, there's the data. So you will notice that it is in fact updating the database behind the scenes. By the way, this DB browser for SQLite is a very simple little tool to use. If you just fire up Bing, do a search for DB browser, you'll find it, and then you'll notice that you can just hit Open Database and then navigate to the directory that happens to be in, and then obviously you'll notice that you could go in and just refresh, and then that will show you all of the data right there. So there it is actually being saved behind the scenes. So Susan showed off everything that you're typically going to have to do when you're using Django. Yeah, from a code perspective. And what I love about all the demos that you did was the fact that you didn't actually do anything directly with the database.
Because I don't have to.
Yeah, you didn't care where the database was, what the database was. So, but just to kind of prove that, yes, it is in fact saving inside the
yeah, it's nice to see that. You know, sometimes you're sitting and going, I think it's populating a database behind the scenes, or sometimes you're running a query and you can't get a match, and you're like, is that because the record doesn't exist, or because I'm writing my query wrong? So it's nice to sometimes be able to look at the original table and look at the records and go, no, the record's there, so now I know it's my query that's giving me trouble.
Exactly.
So that absolutely is very helpful. Great suggestion. And, thank you to whoever.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was, but yeah, gold star for the day.
Awesome.
In any event, I don't know about you, and I don't know about everybody that's watching, but I'm hungry, and we're going to make this all about me. So let's go ahead and take a meal break, and we'll be back in about an hour.
See you soon.